In American hospitals, a plastic bracelet of a specific color with a name is always placed on a patient's wrist. The color of a bracelet indicates the patient's condition and the nature of the illness. For example, red bracelets are only put on deceased patients being taken downstairs. One day, an experienced surgeon who was working a long night shift finished a difficult operation. After resting a bit, he headed to the hospital basement where, among other things, the morgue was located. He stepped into the elevator along with a young woman. When the elevator reached the dark basement and the metal doors opened, they saw another woman waiting for the elevator, staring at the floor. But before she could even take a step forward, the doctor forcefully slammed the elevator doors shut and frantically pressed the bottom for the top floor. The woman inside was surprised by such rudeness and asked what happened. The surgeon, breathing heavily, replied, "That was a woman I was just operating on. She died under anesthesia 10 minutes ago. Didn't you notice the red bracelet on her wrist?" The woman in the elevator smiled slowly, raised her hand to the doctor's face and said, "Like this one." One day, after a long day of wandering through the dense forest, a hunter was caught in the middle of the thicket by a stormy night. It had already gotten dark, freezing rain began to fall, and having no idea of his location, he decided to keep walking in one direction until he made it out of the woods. After several grueling hours of walking, he stumbled into a small clearing, in the middle of which stood a wooden cabin. Realizing he had no chance and could freeze to death, he decided to stay in the cabin for the night. The door was unlocked, and no one was inside. The hunter, exhausted to the bone, lay down on the single creaky bed. Looking around the dark cabin, the hunter was surprised to find that all the walls were decorated with several portraits painted in great, intricate detail. Without exception, all the pale faces in the portraits stared at him maliciously and with clear threat. The hunter felt extremely uncomfortable under their piercing gazes. Ignoring the faces in the paintings that glared at him with hatred, he turned to face the wooden wall, covered himself with his jacket, and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, he woke up to bright sunlight hitting his face. Looking around the bright room, he froze. He saw that there were absolutely no portraits on the walls in the cabin. There were only windows. Two girls, Julia and Roxy, went to a college party. At the party, Julia got pretty drunk, while Roxy was relatively sober. As is often the case, the sober one had to walk her fun friend home through the night city. Opening the door to Julia's dark apartment, Roxy somehow managed to put her friend into bed. Wishing her a good night, she turned off the light, closed the front door behind her, and walked back to her own home. After walking through a couple of dark alleys, Roxy suddenly realized that she had left her purse at Julia's house, which contained the keys to her own apartment. Coming back to Julia's, she opened the door with a spare key and decided not to turn on the hallway light so as not to wake her sleeping friend. Feeling around in the dark for her purse, which was lying on the armchair in the living room, she quietly left the apartment. The next day, Roxy got a call from the police asking her to come to the precinct immediately. In the interrogation room, they showed her a couple of the photos. Roxy realized in horror that it was Julia in the pictures. She was lying on her blood-soaked bed with a slit rod. The precinct detective showed Roxy a piece of paper that had been lying on the murdered Julia's bed. Written on it in crooked letters was, "Good thing you didn't turn on the lights. Otherwise, I would have had to kill you, too." It was a cold winter evening. Sarah, a 16-year-old girl, was home alone. Her parents had gone to a friend's holiday party. Heavy snow had been falling all day, covering the world in a white blanket, but inside it was warm. Sarah sat on the living room couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching a movie. By midnight, her parents still hadn't returned, and the silence in the big house began to weigh on her. The TV stood in the corner next to a large panoramic window. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. In the darkness, amidst the falling snow, she made out the figure of a man. He was walking toward the house. As he approached the glass, the light from the screen hit his face. It was covered in scars, and his lips were stretched into a sinister, unnaturally white grin. Sarah froze, afraid to move. The man just stood there, staring silently at her through the glass. His eyes didn't blink. Then, he slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something shiny. It was a long knife. Unable to take it anymore, Sarah grabbed her phone from the table and dialed 911, never taking her eyes off the creepy visitor. "There is a man outside the window," she whispered. "He has a knife. Please, come quickly," she said, motionless, minutes dragging like hours. The man outside the window kept standing there, smiling at her. Finally, sirens were heard in the distance. Police started banging on the door. Sarah rushed to open it. The officers searched the perimeter, but came back with nothing. "Ma'am, we didn't find anyone," the officers said. "That's impossible," Sarah screamed, pointing at the window. "He was just standing right there. You couldn't have missed him." "It is what it is," the officer shook his head. "There is a fresh snow outside. It is completely undisturbed. If someone had been standing there, there would be footprints." "But I saw him with my own eyes," she insisted. The officers were about to leave when one of them suddenly frowned. He slowly walked behind the couch where Sarah had been sitting. "Oh my God," he whispered. On the carpet right behind the couch were wet boot prints and a discarded knife. "You didn't see the man outside the window," the officer said, turning pale. "You were looking at his reflection in the glass. The whole time, he was standing right
behind you."
One young girl was riding home late at night in an almost empty subway car. Then she noticed that a woman sitting opposite her was staring intently at her, not taking her eyes off her at all. On either side of the woman sat two gloomy old men pressing closely. After a while, this blank, unblinking stare began to seriously disturb the girl. The woman didn't take her eyes off her for a second, and her head swayed slightly to the rhythm of the train. At the next station, a tall man in a coat entered the car. The woman opposite didn't even glance at him. When the train screeched to a halt once again, the man stood up to exit and suddenly grabbed the girl sharply by the arm and nimbly pulled her out onto the platform behind him. The car doors slammed shut immediately, and the train drove off into the darkness of the tunnel. The girl started screaming at him in fear, but the man let go of her arm and simply said, "Calm down, I just saved your life. I simply couldn't leave you alone in that car. The woman sitting opposite you was dead, and those two men were just propping her body up." 12 years old Emily lived with her father in the small suburban house. Since her mother died, her father had become everything to her. One morning, her father said he was leaving on the business trip and would be back late at night. "Don't open the door for anyone," he said, strictly kissing her forehead. "Even if you think it's me, check first." Emily nodded. After coming home from school, she did her homework and went to bed. She had a dream. She stood on the edge of a busy highway. On the other side stood her father. He was cupping his hands to his mouth and screaming desperately, but the sounds of cars drowned out his voice. She strained her ears and could barely make out the words.
Don't open the door.
And then Emily woke up. A loud doorbell was echoing through the house. She jumped up, put on her slippers, and ran to the door. Looking through the peephole, she saw her father's face. "Hold on, Dad, opening up," she yelled and grabbed the deadbolt. But something stopped her. She looked through the peephole again. Her father's eyes were wide open and unblinking. His face was pale, frozen in gray mass of fear. The bell rang again. "Dad?" she called out. Silence. Just a bell, again and again. "Dad, why aren't you answering?" She started to cry. "Is someone there with you? I won't open it until you answer." The doorbell rang for another hour, but her father stayed silent. The girl sat huddled in the corner of the hallway until she fell asleep from fear. She woke up. The ringing had stopped. She looked through the peephole. Her father was still there. With trembling hands, she unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. Her scream woke up all the neighbors. Her father was dead. His body was sitting on the porch, propped against the door like a broken doll. The whole time, someone was holding his corpse, pressing his face against the peephole and pushing the doorbell with their free hand. Attached to her father's chest was a note. "Smart girl." In a little girl's bedroom, there was an old wardrobe that had a large mirror attached to the inside of the door. This girl was a fan of tickling her own nerves before bed, so sometimes she would open this wardrobe in the dead of the night and look at her reflection in the dark. One time when she got bored, she did it again. She was surprised by an interesting and creepy effect that appeared this time. Thanks to a strange play of moonlight and shadow, her reflection in the mirror appeared to have empty, black eye sockets and a huge, unnaturally wide mouth. The reflection looked very realistic, almost three-dimensional, and mimicked her movements. After admiring this creepy sight for a minute, the girl closed the door and went to the bathroom. But on the way, she remembered something, and it made her instantly turn on the bright light in the bathroom, lock herself inside, and wake up her parents and half the neighbors with her hysterical scream. The thing was, during rearranging the day before, her father had removed and taken the mirror out of the wardrobe. My neighbor Julia told me this story. A few years ago, she and her husband Sasha were renting an old apartment. One morning, after her husband had already left for work, Julia woke up to a strange sensation. It felt like someone was gently stroking her hair. She smiled sleepily, thinking Sasha had come back to say goodbye. But when she opened her eyes and turned around, the room was empty. Just imagined it, she thought, and went back to sleep. A couple of days later, it happened again. Julia was lying on her side, facing the wall, dozing off. Suddenly, she felt the mattress behind her deep under someone's weight. She heard heavy, raspy breathing right above her ear. Someone's icy fingers touched her neck and slowly crawled down to her shoulder. Julia froze with terror. She tried to find a rational explanation. "Sasha, is that you?" she asked with a trembling voice. The breathing behind her stopped for a second. The fingers gripped her shoulder with painful force. And then, a quiet stranger's voice whispered right into her ear.
No, don't turn around.
As if scalded, Julia jumped out of the covers and ran out of the apartment in her pajamas without even looking back. She waited for her husband outside, shaking hysterically. Later, they learned from the neighbors that a young guy used to live in that apartment. He went mad from loneliness and hanged himself right above the bed where they slept. Apparently, he is still looking for someone to keep him
Company.
The couple decided to take a break and go into town for dinner. They called a babysitter they knew who often watched their kids. When she arrived, the two children were already asleep in their beds upstairs. She just had to sit in this huge old house and keep an eye on things. Soon, she got bored. She decided to watch TV, but there was no cable in the living room. The parents were strict. The girl called the father and asked the permission to watch TV in their bedroom. "Of course," the father replied. "Thanks," she said. "And I have one more request. Do you mind if I cover up that angel statue outside the bedroom window, or at least close the curtains? It's really unnerving me." That silence hung on the line. For a second, it seemed like the connection was lost. And then, the father screamed into the phone, and there was genuine terror in his voice. "Grab the kids, run out of the house. We're calling the police." "What? Why?" The girl got scared. "We don't have an angel statue." The police found all three of them dead 10 minutes after the call. The house was empty, and the angel statue was never found. Back in the 19th century, it was customary in Ireland to make coffins with holes through which a long copper pipe with a bell on the top end was inserted. The pipe allowed people who had been mistakenly pronounced dead and buried alive to breathe, and using a string and the bell, they could signal the cemetery groundskeeper. One day, Harold, an old undertaker in a small town, hearing the desperate ringing of the bell in the dead of night, went to check if it was once again the cruel pranks of local children. Sometimes the bells rang due to strong winds, but not this time. The door by the tombstone was shifting. A breaking female voice from below, from under the ground, begged Harold to dig up the grave immediately. "Are you Sarah O'Bannon?" Harold asked cautiously, kneeling down. "Yes," answered a muffled, panicked voice through the pipe. "Were you born on September 17, 1827? "Yes, please." The tombstone says you died on February 20, 1857. "No, I'm alive. A horrible mistake has been made. Please dig me up. I can't breathe." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Harold said, kicking the bell and breaking it off, then kicking heavy dirt into the copper pipe. "It is August now, and whatever the hell you are down there, you are sure as hell not alive anymore, and you are not getting out." I forced my heavy eyes open and propped myself up on my elbows in the bed. The digital clock glowed with a crimson light in the dark, showing 3:23 a.m. Standing by my bed was my little daughter. "Do you want to crawl into bed with us and tell me about him?" I whispered, rubbing my eyes. "No, Daddy," she replied quietly. The strangeness of the situation made me wake up almost completely. The room was cold. I could barely make out the pale figure of my little girl in the darkness of the bedroom. "Why not, sweetie? It's just a bad dream," I said. "Because in my dream, when I told you about him, someone wearing mommy's skin woke up on the bed right next to you." For a moment, my heart dropped into my stomach. My breathing stopped. I froze, blood running cold with terror, unable to take my eyes off my daughter standing in the doorway. And then someone slowly rustled the blanket right behind my back.